All right, today we're going to be a bit like medical detectives. We're going to follow this trail of some truly baffling clues in what is, honestly, one of modern medicine's most heartbreaking puzzles. And that's the mystery of these strange clusters of ALS. So, where do we even start? Well, our first clue, it doesn't come from some high-tech lab or a test tube. Nope, it comes from a single classroom. And it's a story so weird, it basically forced scientists to ask themselves, are we just looking at a chilling coincidence? Or is this something more? Almost like a crime scene. Okay, picture this. We're in a high school in Ohio. It's the 1980s. And this really unnerving pattern starts to show up. And it has nothing to do with grades or students or anything like that. No, this was about the teachers. And it all seemed to circle back to one single shared space. I mean, just think about how incredibly unlikely this is. Over an 18-year span, 3 teachers, who weren't related at all developed ALS. And get this, they all taught in the very same classroom for several years. The one single thread connecting them was the room itself.
And that really is the huge question that drives this whole field of research. I mean, when a disease this rare pops up in a cluster like that, is it just a tragic coincidence, a statistical fluke, a bad roll of a dice, or is it a clue, a breadcrumb trail that could lead us to some kind of hidden environmental trigger?
But look, to really get why a clue like that classroom is so incredibly important, we first have to wrap our heads around the mystery we're dealing with. We need a quick baseline on the disease itself. So ALS, you might know it as Lou Gehrig's disease, and it is a particularly cruel illness. What it does is it systematically destroys the very neurons that control our muscles. And the really tragic part, the mind often stays completely sharp, essentially a prisoner inside a body that's slowly, well, shutting down. And this chart, this really gets to the core of the whole mystery. See, for the vast majority of people with ALS, we're talking 90 to 95%, there's no family history, no obvious genetic link. It just seems to strike out of the blue. Scientists called this sporadic ALS, and it's this huge, massive question mark that makes the hunt for environmental triggers so incredibly urgent. And that, right there, is why this idea of clusters is so critical. These are the hotspots, right? The little geographical blips on the radar where investigators go hunting for clues. Clues that might finally crack the code of sporadic ALS. So, to be clear, a cluster isn't just a few sad cases in the same town. It's way more specific than that. It's a statistically significant number of cases. It's when the disease pops up in one place or in one group of people way more often than you'd ever expect by chance. It basically points a big flashing arrow at some kind of shared environmental factor. Okay, to see how this works in the real world, let's open up a case file. This is one of the most compelling modern examples out there. We're heading to the French Alps, to this tiny, beautiful little ski village called Montchevet. Now get this. In this tiny little village, we're talking a year-round population of just a few hundred people. The rate of ALS was at least 10 times higher than the national average. That is not a statistical blip. For researchers, that is a full-on 5-alarm fire. So the investigation here was super thorough. They found at least 16 cases, which for a town this small is just an astronomical number. The victims were a mix of locals and immigrants, so that pretty much ruled out a shared genetic link. And maybe the biggest clue of all, a married couple, no blood relation, both got the disease years apart. I mean, that just screams shared environment. So after they crossed genetics and other stuff off the list, the investigators started looking at local traditions. And they zeroed in on something: foraging for wild mushrooms. And that led them to a prime suspect, a toxic mushroom called the false morel. It turns out this thing contains a really potent neurotoxin that, if you're exposed to it over and over, could potentially, well, damage your motor neurons. But here's the thing. The false morel in Montchevet, that's just one suspect in one case. The investigation into all these different ALS clusters has actually come up with a whole lineup of potential environmental bad guys. Yeah, this lineup of suspects goes way beyond just mushrooms. If you look at this table, you can see a bit of a pattern emerge. So in Montchevet, the suspect is a natural toxin from a fungus. But then you look at other clusters, like one around a lake in New Hampshire, and suddenly the focus is on toxins from blue-green algae. And in still other cases, the clues point toward more industrial stuff, like heavy metals or pesticides you'd find in certain jobs. It's like every cluster sends you down a totally different path in this huge maze.
But here's the really frustrating part. Even with all these compelling leads, and despite all the incredible work researchers are doing, these ALS clusters are still one of the hardest medical mysteries to solve. Period.
So why is this so incredibly hard? Well, for a few big reasons. First, there's this massive time lag. Someone could be exposed to a toxin, and then decades could pass before they show a single symptom. Second, the number of cases, even in what we call a cluster, is still pretty small, which makes getting rock-solid statistical proof really tough. And then you just add in how complex our daily lives are, what we eat, drink, breathe, and the simple fact that sometimes things happen by random chance. You can start to see why pinning down one single cause is almost impossible. Because, behind all the science and the stats and the theories, we just have to remember what's really at stake here. This is not some abstract academic puzzle. A patient from that Monchavin cluster said it perfectly. They described the relentless daily losses of the disease as you lose a finger or you lose your laugh. And that it hits you, right? It's a powerful reminder of the very real, very human cost of all this.
So, in the end, these clusters, the one in that Ohio classroom, the village in the French Alps, and all the others around the world, they're the clues. They are these tantalizing hints that maybe, just maybe, sporadic ALS isn't completely random after all. They force us to keep digging, to keep asking hard questions about our environment, and to wonder if the key to solving this devastating mystery has been hiding all along, right there in the geography of our lives.